I'm here in Calgary at LifeCanada's Pro-Life Conference, an organization that represents numerous pro-life groups across the country. The theme for this year's conference, just a few weeks after the federal election, is Changes in the Air. Now, for a lot of pro-life Canadians who have been very frustrated with the re-election of Justin Trudeau, who is not just pro-choice himself, but actively works against pro-life sentiment in the country and in his own party, the message here has been fairly optimistic, in fact. People suggesting that there is a lot to be hopeful for and a lot to be proud of in the pro-life movement standing in Canada. One example of this comes from Alyssa Golob, one of the co-founders of Right Now, a pro-life group that aims to nominate and then elect pro-life candidates across the country. This is what Alyssa had to say.
Canada is now a more pro-life country today than it was before the election. Out of the 53 Conservative pro-life MPs who are running for re-election, 52 of them got elected. And out of the 22 additional Conservative MPs, 15 of them are pro-life. So we now have more pro-life MPs sitting in the House of Commons now than we did before the election. In Ontario, there are now more pro-life MPPs than there are MPPs in the entire Liberal caucus. And in Alberta, when I moved here last year to help in the provincial election, we helped over 52 pro-life candidates in the nomination process, and the majority of them got elected, which resulted in Motion 506, an NDP motion to expand abortion access, being defeated a couple of weeks ago.
That's very much the message, that yes, there are more pro-life members of Parliament in Canada now than there were before the election. They don't comprise a majority, but it shows progress in her view, and also Right Now has been looking at success in elections in Ontario and Alberta, where they've also managed to identify and elect pro-lifers to be candidates first off, and then eventually to run and win in elections. What was interesting, however, is really looking at some of the broader cultural issues here. And one of the things this conference has done is focus on the various stages of the pro-life movement, from education to nominating and electing candidates to working within the political system and trying to advocate and basically lobby politicians on pro-life legislation. How do you do that, however, when you're talking about a government and a governing party that are hostile to pro-life values? I spoke about that with Tabitha Ewart, who is a legal counsel and advisor for We Need a Law, a group that, as the name suggests, focuses on pushing for a law in Canada on abortion. The only democracy in the world that doesn't have any regulation on abortion is Canada. We Need a Law works to change that. Although she says there are different pieces of legislation, apart from prohibitions or limitations on abortion, that are on the table that are relevant to pro-lifers. This is what she said she's working on.
One of the things we just want to avoid doing is just yelling at our politicians that abortion is wrong without coming up with any reasonable solutions. So that's one of the things why, as an organization, we are always advocating for our international standards law, right? It's something that would have a 13-week gestational limit and a waiting period and counseling for women going through an abortion, and is working alongside politicians, talking about strategy of how to introduce it, how to bring it up in conversation with the media and with the general public. So there's lots that still needs to be done, especially if there's any individual Canadians just going to their politician and encouraging them to be bold on this issue. And in terms of with pro-abortion politicians, there's still a lot of things that we have common ground with. I mean, 90-something% of Canadians are against sex selection abortion. That's something that everyone should be able to get on board with. Things like being against the Canada Summer Jobs attestation. We saw members of all parties being uncomfortable with requiring people to attest that they support abortion. So there's lots of things that can be done regardless of where someone's stance is on the issue.
So these are some of the themes, some of the reasons that people are optimistic, even with pro-lifers comprising a minority of the representatives of the Parliament of Canada. Now, let's talk about some of the cultural forces here. I spoke to Jonathan Van Maren, author of a book about the culture war, about the cultural battles that we see, and also himself a pro-life advocate working with the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform. And he says that a lot of these big issues we see around the world are, in fact, showing that opinion is shifting, that the pro-life message is being spread. The problem in North America, the problem in Canada, is that the media is out of alignment with the people. Here's what he had to say about that. Look, I mean, Justin Trudeau won again.
Yep.
The media tried to make this about social issues and really spin that as a negative against conservatives. Where do you think the culture is on these things? Before the politics, the culture on these social issues now compared to prior to the election?
Well, interestingly, I think the best way to explain that is to contrast what we see on the ground versus the political conversation. So with the organization I work for, the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform, we're going door to door every day. We're talking to people, and the vast majority of Canadians are very uncomfortable with the status quo, which is abortion legal until birth. But 80% of Canadians don't know that fact. So for me, what strikes me, especially during an election period, is this huge divide between what the politicians are saying and what the people on the ground are saying. And the only reason it's so difficult for pro-life issues to get traction in federal politics is due to the fact that so many Canadians are unaware of the status quo that Trudeau himself is defending. So the message that the pro-life movement needs to take away from an election like this is that we need to seize the offensive on this issue. We need to highlight where Justin Trudeau, the Liberal Party, the NDP actually stand. And we need to highlight the fact that we are the only nation, we are the only Western democracy with no laws on abortion whatsoever. Because what we find from a lot of Liberal voters door to door is that they're appalled when they find this out, but almost none of them know this.
This has been just a sampling of some of the messaging we've heard at this conference by LifeCanada. Again, pro-lifers who you may think have lost the election are seeing gains being made. The media doesn't like it. This is why the media has been relentlessly pursuing its anti-social conservative and, quite frankly, anti-religious messaging with Andrew Scheer. They seem to be threatened and working against this idea that, hey, people think it's okay to talk about values. Canadians think it's okay to be pro-life. Canadians think it's okay to elect politicians who are pro-life. The media is the one that is imposing its vision on Canadians, and it seems to be backfiring. We are covering this, talking about the issues that the mainstream media isn't covering, perspectives the mainstream media isn't. We can't do this alone. If you can head on over to tnc.news/donate and tip in a few dollars to keep the lights on and let us keep doing this work and speaking the truth, please do. For True North from Calgary, I'm Andrew Lawton.